point
Yeah.
with certain
Yeah,
musicians, like guitars
just-
for a dime a dozen, but
Yeah.
like an organist, I can see would be.
Yeah, there's much fewer, and that's also going back to this entitlement thing, because the church as a whole has had this entitlement idea that they can have, just like you said, there are lots of organists around, so they thought, well, we don't need to pay them, or we can treat them better.
Well, and that's what I'm getting at exactly,
And
is that's how this sort of started, was because at
Yeah.
one time there were so many of them
Yeah,
that they stopped getting paid because
yeah.
they didn't have to pay them anymore.
So now
They feel
there
it
are
should be
fewer and fewer.
donated. They feel they're entitled to everything and everything should be donated.
Well, it became
Yeah.
a privilege
That's
for the
what
organists
everybody
to
feels.
work at
Well,
the
for
church.
church.
It became a
Yeah.
privilege for them.
That's
But any
right.
organization that can get away with that will.
Yeah.
Any charitable
We'll
type
exploit it,
organization.
yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter if they're charitable
No,
or
it doesn't
not.
matter if
you know,
they're
any-
charitable.
Churches have
Well, the whole
In
artistic
fact, a
world in
charitable
general
organization will
is-
more likely
there's so many
try
people out there
to
who
bargain
want to
with
be
you
artists
Yeah.
that,
in
yeah.
some kind of
Because I mean,
trade or
if
bargain.
there's somebody willing to do it for cheap,
Because
free,
a charitable organization
Right.
tends
Even
to be
like,
more
you know,
on the up and up.
like
Right.
Lavalas going through that right
And
now.
they have
getting
more
rid of
respect
everybody's
for their
unionized,
employees.
and they're bringing in, I don't
They
work for
simply
Lavalas,
do.
but I know somebody who does, and like,
Churches,
they're bringing in
I don't
just keep
really
people
consider
for
churches
like,
charitable
like,
organizations.
Yeah.
They went beyond that a long time.
benefits and all that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And they can do that.
They're sort
because
of,
there's enough
some of
people
them
to come
are
in
in
and do the job.
grassroots,
Mhm.
kind of
So-
getting back to it, I think.
I
But
think bigger companies are using a lot more contractors and
Oh, yeah.
consultants instead of full-time employees.
Yeah.
A lot more.
They'll do whatever's cheapest, and if they can get
Have
somebody
been
to
for a
come and
long
do it for free, they will. You know what
That's
I mean?
true.
If they
You
can
know what?
think
I've
I
been
gotta
for a long
retract
time.
what I said for that. He
Years
doesn't
now.
feel it.
Late
From the
80s.
sake of it.
How do you read
A lot lately, though.
two people?
In the past like 5 years.
Yeah, it's been.
And
Or-
so
How do you-
years,
how do you-
yeah, last 5, 10
how
years.
do you-
I would say that that's actually that's a lot more difficult, because when you get two people together, they will start to, when we talked about mirroring before, they will be sympathetic with one another.
Absolutely. How do you put them in a place where you can actually make both of them fall into a trap where they start making it worse? I'm a adoption counselor for dogs.
Okay.
Excellent.
So my job is actually to interview people, and they come and they want a dog, and I have to actually, I'm the one that says you can take the dog or you can't.
Right.
But then I'm in big trouble because if I give them a dog that bites, well, obviously, I put them in the risk, the dog has to be put down, it's a big mess, right? So this is really like a really important class for me because I really like to learn how to know that these people are lying to me.
Leading questions, I think, are the best way to go. Like, you just will have to go with a series of leading questions, and some of them are, what I would advise is asking some questions that really have absolutely nothing to do with what you're talking about. When I was, I wouldn't necessarily advise doing this per se, but when I used to be assistant manager of a kitchen back in New Brunswick, one of the questions I used to ask people in job interviews were, if you were stranded in the wilderness due to a plane crash, how long would it take you to resort to cannibalism? And seeing how people reacted to that question was always interesting. The people who responded right away were the people that I thought that actually knew what was going on, and the people who stopped to think about it, I usually just kicked out and didn't have anything to do
Well,
with it.
there's a questionnaire, that's the problem. You give them like a 40 question, question
Right.
or whatever, and then you go through every question and you ask them a little more.
But-
But I like to know when they're lying as by looking at them, as you said, when they're making up like, oh yeah, I have tons of experience with this breed, I used to have this dog, and I'm sure they're making it up, right?
Ask them those regular questions, but also ask them questions that have absolutely, just, if you were a sound effect, what sound effect would you be? See how they respond, and compare their response. Look at their eyes, and compare their response to the way that they respond when you ask them about
well,
what's
and
actually
average
regular.
people
Hang
will
on.
not look you in the eye when they're lying.
Most people
They
have
do
actually
lie.
looked at me in the eyes, and they lie.
Sorry,
Okay,
Michael?
then their pupils will dilate.
If they're lying,
Yes.
No, if
I
you're,
think
no, that's
that's-
not true. Your pupils dilate if you look at something you like, or you're having a
so
positive
they want to go to
response.
bed with me, right? or something.
They contract if you have a negative response.
That's
So
what's
it's-
most
it's
clever.
Or if you bring
People
up a
dilate
particular
has nothing
breed,
to do.
their pupils
Sorry,
dilate,
Michael?
then-
A particular breed.
I know if I'm with my partner and someone asks me a question that I don't feel comfortable answering, I check with her visually. I've been with her long enough that I can read her body language and know whether or not I'm allowed to tell the truth. So I mean that's a focus of one. But it feels to me like something where if somebody goes, before they answer you, that
Yeah.
that might be an indication of trouble.
As in they're unsure that what they're gonna answer is
Yeah,
gonna cause trouble,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, looking for who's leading, because there's always someone leading the partner at that point in time.
So you mislead them with another question to
Yeah.
see a reaction.
Something they're not expecting to hear. Like, ask them something that they're not expecting and see how they react, and then compare that reaction to the way that they react to the questions that they are expecting.
When it comes to adopting dogs, I'd ask them a lot about children,
True.
personally. How they feel about children, what they think about, you know, if they live next door to a school, how would they feel if it got noisy at recess all the time?
But then I really despise children, and I'm really a good animal lover. So
Really?
yeah, no, I.
Yeah, well, they say those who have feelings for animals
Children
don't
are
like
not,
people.
like-
So.
I'm
I
not a
just don't-
huge fan of children either, but I wouldn't go out and purposely abuse them.
No, I wouldn't abuse them, but I don't want them near.
I love
And I
having
would love
pets.
want
with
them
a-
near.
I like snakes, you know, I like scorpions.
Well, yeah, okay, but you don't want them near because you want your privacy, you want your own space.
No,
Maybe not hurt them, but squeeze a lemon in their eye or something like
I don't know, there's a quality of children that I do like, right? I don't like the smell, I don't like the soft.
I don't like being around kids, but I do like the sound of the schoolyard near my house. So that's an interesting example.
It's weird.
Yeah, I do like the sound of the schoolyard near my house, and I do like pets. So.
Yeah, I wish them well, I just don't want them around. But I really like animals, and that's totally my upbringing, right? My mother had a kindergarten, and perhaps I'm just sick of it, you know? But then I had a dog, and it was a nice friend. So my friend is the dog, and the children are kind of like...
So I think the
Yeah,
one
so
thing to
I think it
remember-
would be hard to judge me that because I
Yeah,
have
I think-
children, I would be a bad adopter for a dog, because it's not the truth.
I think you got to be careful, like trusting yourself as too much of a psychologist. Well, I think a lot of people who do try to read into things on that end of things think of themselves as really capable psychologists or psychiatrists or whatever they want to think.
That's why I much rather have the immediate response, like the body language response, which is not going deeply into any psychological anything. It's like your body's telling the truth, and your mind and your mouth is saying something else, right?
Well, there's certain books on body language that are pretty good at that.
Yeah, what do
I
you
don't think any
suggest?
book is gonna do it. Like you've gotta go person by person, because any book they give you tendencies and they give you averages,
Well, but
and
that's
that's
what I'm
fine.
getting at, is
Yeah.
there are
But you can
certain,
start with that.
there
Yeah.
are certain
Generalizations.
tendencies that tend to work. Like, for instance, people tend to cross their arms if they're dissociating, or
Right.
Yeah.
or they're, you know, not necessarily lying, but dissociating, trying to not fully communicate something. They tend to cross their legs in the opposite direction if they're disinterested in what's over here. They'll tend to cross their legs this way instead.
Oh, wow.
You know, these are tendencies.
Yeah.
I think, again, if people don't look you in the eye regularly, then
It's a problem.
then that's going to be a problem right away.
And they steal from a culture where you're not supposed to.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's very true.
That's huge.
I saw an interview actually recently with a guy from Nairobi, where he was talking about the difference between that and being in Toronto, and just the amount of at which, or even like, okay, it's funny because they contrasted him with a guy who was from the Maritimes, where I'm from, where it's very regular. Like if you're in the Maritimes, you're in line with someone at the supermarket, you're going to talk to them. You know what I mean? Like you don't sit in the back of the cab. You sit in the front of the cab. People consider you rude if you sit in the back of the cab. Like you're supposed to sit up front and talk to the cab driver. Like everyone talks to everyone all the time. So the major contrast they had with the guy from Nairobi was he had a very difficult time with the job interviews that he was trying to get a job here, and the problem was he did not consider it correct to look someone in the eye when he was talking to them. It's like an aggressive display almost from his culture, whereas the other opposite, they had the guy from the Maritimes who everyone was just like, why the fuck's he staring at me all the time? You know?
Yeah.
Like eye contact, it's a very strong cultural thing, and it's not necessarily. It's a very dependent on where you're from and what the culture.